All right, welcome back to our last recording of Killer Flood. We're going to read 3 chapters today. We're going to see if Dan and Pete are able to get the medicine that Homer or Mr. Land, their neighbor, needs. And the 3 chapters that we're going to read today are called Hands Up, Main Street, and 1 Year Later. So here we go. Chapter 8, Hands Up. Dan's back hurt. His hands hurt. He had blisters. So did Pete. But they rode on to Main Street. On the way, they saw awful things. They saw animals in the water. They saw houses on fire, cars on their side, and downed power lines. But one good thing was hearing the distant sirens. Maybe help was coming. It took a long time to get to Main Street. When Dan felt weak, he remembered Mr. Land. They had to hurry, or Mr. Land might die. Finally, they got close to downtown. There were fire trucks there. Firefighters and police officers stood on the trucks. Dan got to his feet. He shined his light on a truck. Then they called, "Hey! Hey!" A man yelled back into the darkness, "Who's out there?" Dan could not see his face, but he saw lights and cut into the night. Then one was on him and Pete. "Police, put up your hands! Hands up, both of you!" the cops ordered. "Don't shoot!" Dan yelled back. He put his hands in the air. So did Pete. "I'm Dan. This is Pete. We're just kids, but we need help. Please help us." This was met with silence. The light was still in his face. His heart pounded. He hoped the police officer was not trigger happy. "Okay, here's what I want." The cop was in charge. "The kid sitting, you row. The other, stay on your feet." Pete found the oars and he rowed the boat towards the fire truck. Dan grabbed the truck's side. The cop was mad. "Why are you kids out here? You think this is fun? You think if this is a joke? Do you want to get hurt? You need to go home." Dan tried to explain. "We are not out here for fun. We need help." The cop got angrier. "Kid, everyone needs help. You just have to wait your turn." "Why don't you listen?" Dan yelled. It was wrong to scream at the cop, but he had to make him understand. "There's an old man who lives next door. He is sick. He cannot get his medicine. He needs more medicine, or he will die. We will take it back to him." Dan dug into his pocket and he took out Mrs. Land's list. It was still in the bag. "His wife gave me this list. Look." The cop shined his light on the paper and his eyes got big. "How far did you kids row?" It felt like forever, but it did not matter how far. They were here now. "A mile, maybe. Please, take us to the drugstore." The cop moved closer. "A lot of folks will die tonight. This is a killer flood. But maybe we can save a life. Come on." Chapter 9, Main Street. The police officer's name was Glass. The boys made room for him in the boat. He had a super strong flashlight. Dan pointed it down the street. Officer Glass rode strong. Very soon they were in the middle of Main Street. Dan looked around in horror. Oh, what a mess! The clothes store, the food store, the auto parts store, the diner, the sporting store. All of them had broken windows. The force of the water had been too strong, and water filled the shops. There were odd bubbles in the road. Dan figured out that those bubbles were the tops of cars. What had happened to the people in those cars? The drugstore was at the end of the street. They got closer. Where are your parents, kids? Officer Glass asked. Pete answered. They went to the city for a show. Why don't you give me their phone numbers? I'll get word to them that you are okay. You can call them? Dan was so happy. No, I cannot, but I can tell my boss on the radio and he will take care of it. Officer Glass pulled on the oars. The boys told the cops their parents' numbers. Then they got to the drugstore. The windows were all busted out and the store was flooded. Officer Glass rode right into the store. Dan pointed the way. The drugs are in the back, the cop said. I just hope. You hope what? Dan asked. The cop pulled hard on the oars. I hope it isn't all for nothing. Pray what we need is still dry. Dan gulped. He hadn't thought of that. They got to the drug counter. Officer Glass took off his gun, his belt, and his radio, and then he jumped into the water. Shine the light for me, he told Dan. I want to help, Dan said. The cop stopped. That's against the rules, he seemed to think. Well, okay. Pete, you take the light. Dan jumped in the water. It was cold, and he waded into the drug area. He knew what to look for. Blood test kits, needles, and all the meds for Mr. Land. He and Officer Glass split up. Pete tried to shine the light for both of them. So many drugs were below water. They were ruined. Dan had no luck, and neither did the cop. Okay, said Officer Glass. We can give this about one more. Suddenly Dan shouted, I found it! I found it! It was right in front of him. An area marked diabetes. The drugs, the needles, the test kits, they were all dry. He found a bag and filled it up. The police officer helped. Dan was so excited. Then he got more excited. He heard the sound of a motorboat. Officer Glass was soaked, but he still grinned. That's our ride. It's your ride, I should say. It will take you where you are going. What about this boat? Pete called. It will be safe with me. Dan watched as a police powerboat came right into the store. It pulled up next to Mr. Land's fishing boat. There were 2 rescue workers in it. These are the boys, Officer Glass told the workers. I'll take their boat back to my station. Take them where they need to go. The rescue workers helped Dan and Pete into their boat. A minute later, they roared away. In a boat with power, they could be at Land's house fast. But was it already too late? Dan hoped not. Chapter 10, 1 year later. Everyone came to Main Street 1 year after the flood. All the water was gone and all the shops were open. Everything was clean and the dam had been rebuilt. It was stronger than ever. There would be no more floods. One flood was bad enough. Too many people had died. Chairs were set up on the street. Those who had helped save lives would be thanked. There would be a special speech and music. Dan and Pete went with their parents. There were seats in front just for them. Mr. and Mrs. Land were already there. They were all dressed up. Mr. Land stood with his cane. Then Dan came near. He stuck out his hand. How are my lifesaver? He turned to Dan's parents. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I owe your son my life. Dan spoke up. Pete too. Of course, Pete too. Dan recalled the last part of that terrible night, the night of the killer flood. The rescue boat had sped them to the Land's house. He and Pete took the meds inside. Mr. Land was close to death. Mrs. Land gave Mr. Land a shot. The meds took care of him. Mr. Land got better. It was the best moment of Dan's life. The mayor gave a speech. He had a number of people stand so the crowd could see them. He praised the rescue workers, the firefighters, the police officers, and the 2 boys. They say kids are good for nothing. The mayor looked over the crowd. That they only care about video games, taking selfies, and texting. I am here to say that is not true. You all know the story of Dan and Pete. These kids saved a life. They did not have to. They faced danger. They put their own lives at risk. They can show us all how to be better people. Then the mayor asked the boys to stand. Dan did not feel like he had done anything so great. Mr. Land was his friend, and his friend was sick, so he helped. That was all. Dan wanted Mr. Land to stand, so he and Pete helped him to his feet. They stood by him as the crowd clapped. The clapping went on for a long time. Finally, Dan smiled. It had been a killer flood. Dan had helped save a life. The mayor was right. It was way better than video games. And in the last little picture there, you can even see that Fluffy the cat made it out okay. I hope you enjoyed Killer Flood. Take just a minute now and in your Canvas page, tell why Hands Up is a good chapter title, why Main Street is a good chapter title, and why 1 Year Later is a good chapter title.